Thank you all for joining. So it's good morning for some of you or afternoon for some of you as well. But thank you for coming to today's webinar hosted by Dot, titled Sleeping Soundly, Protecting Your Hotel Guests and Reputation from Bed Bugs. A little bit about the format of today's webinar is there'll be a short talk, probably about 20 to 25 minutes, followed by some time for Q&A. I'm Monica. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Rory Fry as your speaker today. Rory brings over 15 years of leadership experience in hospitality and environmental services. At DOT, he's focused on advancing the scent-based detection globally and helping organizations adopt smarter and more predictive approaches to pest management. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rory, and he's going to present to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. A pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining. Let's get my screen shared and get the slide decks up for you. So I'm hoping everyone can see that. As with all modern technology, as soon as I present, everyone disappears. So moving forward. So firstly, hello everyone. Welcome to the latest in DOT's webinar series. I'm glad you could all make it, and I'm incredibly excited to present to you all today. So today I'll be talking through where we currently are with bedbugs in hospitality, all things bedbugs or bedbugs 101, and importantly, how proactive monitoring can be used to reduce risk and costs and increase operational and financial efficiency within hospitality. So I think it's really important that we start the webinar by focusing on, well, what is the current reality with bedbugs, which you'll have to just bear with me because my screen has frozen. There we go. So bedbugs, it's the not so glamorous side of travel that might make your guests squirt. Bedbugs are known to nestle into hotel mattresses, hitchhike in luggage, burrow in fabric on public transportation, headrests, or the backs of seats. But I think what's important to understand is how common it is for guests to actually come across them when traveling. A recent survey from the Sleep Doctor and reports actually by Forbes in 2024 state that 1 in 7 travelers, or 14% of travelers in the US, reported a bedbug encounter. The interesting thing with that is actually that 20% of those sightings happened in 5-star hotels. And I think that's really important because bedbugs traditionally are perceived as a hygiene issue. But what these numbers show us is that bedbugs are not a hygiene issue. Bedbugs are a travel issue and not a budget problem. And if we put that into a hotel room perspective, we're seeing globally roughly 1 in 50 hotel rooms experience a bedbug infestation annually. And overall, what's that doing is that's costing the industry roughly around 15 billion euros each year in lost revenue, reputational damage, chemical treatment, as well as soft furnishing replacements and other expenses. So historically, bedbugs weren't necessarily seen as a major issue. What we're seeing in the post-COVID world is we're seeing them have an absolutely huge impact on hospitality. And I think it's important that we discuss the impact that COVID has had and the way that it's impacted perceptions of bedbugs within hospitality. So COVID-19 shut down the hospitality sector. I'm sure a number of you working in hospitality and have had long careers and therefore experienced COVID when it hit, and it completely shut down the hospitality sector. And it restricted people's movements. Hotels, hostels, transportation networks that had been battling bedbug infestations for years suddenly found themselves with a window of opportunity to tackle the problem. In fact, by 2021, bedbugs had virtually disappeared from the hospitality and transport sector. In fact, data from the Swiss Pest Advisory Service in Zurich actually suggests that in 2021, bedbugs reached their lowest level since 2013. However, bedbugs in residential sectors were much less affected, and the impact of social distancing rules on pest management services actually exacerbated the problem. So as travel restrictions were lifted in early 2022, bedbugs were very quick to return to their old haunts. The post-pandemic bedbug recovery seems to be what triggered the late 2023 media attention when we look at bedbugs. And we can see this from the statistics. For example, Rentokil recorded a 68% increase in bedbug activity between 2023 to 2024. And councils up and down the UK also recording over 14,587 bedbug callouts in 2023, which was a 23% rise compared to 2022. With the increase of travel and access to information for hotel guests, there's more pressure now, more than ever, on hotels when it comes to pests. In fact, a recent survey actually found that pests were the number one concern for over 70% of travellers. Now, As we progress through 2026, experts are warning of even bigger increase, driven by warmer summers, recovering international travel volumes, and particularly modern housing patterns. All of this really goes to show that if you think bed bugs aren't a problem for you, you might want to think again. So, we've spoken about the reality in COVID. Let me introduce you to hospitality's public enemy number one, the bed bug. So bedbugs are a notoriously tricky insect. In fact, when it comes to their size, adults are only about 4 to 5 millimeters long, roughly the size of an apple seed. Nymphs are much smaller, particularly in their first few instars or their first few life cycles. They can be up to just 1 millimeter. They're often harder to see and they're often transparent until they feed. So adult bedbugs can live 6 to 12 months, depending on food availability. And actually, a lot of bedbugs can survive over a year without feeding. And they can actually lay dormant in rooms without a host for over 12 months in the right conditions. So bedbugs traditionally as well go through 5 life cycles, through 5 nymph stages before becoming adults, and they have to have a feed on blood to molt to the next stage. In fact, a single female can lay between 200 and 500 eggs in her lifetime. So bedbugs only feed on blood and usually at night. What they do is they actually inject an anticoagulant and anesthetic into the skin, which is why bites often don't hurt immediately. In fact, recent studies have shown that up to 70% of people don't immediately react to a bedbug bite, meaning that there can be a huge delay between the bite taking place and the guest noticing the issue. The biggest challenge that we're seeing in the pest control world, particularly when it comes to bedbugs at the moment, is resistance, and particularly resistance to common insecticides. And this is really having an issue in terms of making infestations harder to control. Professional treatments often involve heat, steam, or chemical combinations. And I think the resistance factor is one that really needs to be brought more to life as it stands at the moment. In fact, we are seeing a huge number of bedbug resistance, which means that anyone that's treating rooms with traditional chemical methods, what actually happens is that you're destroying the non-resistant bedbugs and therefore strengthening the population of the resistant bedbugs, allowing for that population to grow at a much faster rate and to maintain resistance as they keep breeding through generations. So we know that bedbugs are an issue in hospitality. And I think it's really important to understand and look further into how bedbugs actually navigate the world, because it's incredibly difficult to how humans navigate the world. But it's massively important to understand how, so we can understand how best to detect and to treat. So let's talk about chemotaxis. Chemotaxis in insects is a real crucial behavioral mechanism where insects either move towards attractants, a positive, or they move away from repellents, a negative chemical cue. So this behavior guides essential life functions such as locating host plants, finding mates, avoiding predators, looking for a meal. All of their key decision making is based on what they can smell, in essence, and moving towards the positive or away from the negative. If, in fact, if they detect a decrease in the concentration when they move away from the odor plume, they actually change direction to make sure that they're locating and finding the source of that odor. And there are 2 main types of chemical cues. And when it comes to understanding the movement of insects, it's really important to know the difference. So those 2 cues are known as semiochemicals. So semiochemicals are the chemical language, if you like, of the natural world. They're organic compounds emitted by one organism that trigger a specific behavioral or psychological response in another. So they're split into 2 main categories based on who is talking to who and who benefits from the conversation. So you have pheromones, which are all intraspecies, signals sent between members of the same species, so sex pheromones, aggregation pheromones, which are used as a good source or safe place to hide, very common in cockroaches and bedbugs particularly, alarm pheromones, trail pheromones, all intraspecies. And then you actually have allelochemicals, which is interspecies. So these are signals sent between different species. And an interesting one in this that will resonate, I guess, for anyone who's ever been bitten by a bedbug or a mosquito or anyone before, is chiromones. So chiromones benefit the receiver of the scent. So, for example, a bedbug will smell the CO2 and lactic acid or the chiromones from your skin. The bedbug comes out and gets a meal, and you get a bite. Alamones benefit the sender, and cinnamones benefit both. For example, if a plant's attacked by caterpillars and it releases a chemical attractant that attracts wasps to get rid of the bugs attacking it. So we know the resurgence of bedbugs post-COVID is our current reality. We now know how bedbugs communicate. So let's explore how bedbugs actually get brought into the hospitality environments in the first place. Bedbugs are prolific travelers and are actually one in the best in the world in securing a free ride. They can often be found hidden within the fabric of public transport, giving them access to a huge variety of possible end locations. In fact, you or someone you know has likely helped transport bedbugs without even knowing it, and that could be through your clothes. Coats, scarves, gloves, hats. Even they've been known to travel in watches, bracelets, with fabric or textured parts of any kind of accessory. Suitcases, backpacks, purses, handbags, gym bags, tote bags, all of those can carry bed bugs. You've also got other personal items such as belts, wallets, small electronics like headphones, remote controls, or chargers can even hide bed bugs in seams or soft casings. Furniture, so pre-existing furniture, cushions, camping gear, whatever it may be, shoes in the seams, the stitching and under the soles, and particularly in bed linen as well. So pillows, blankets, sheets, mattress covers, even if they're freshly laundered, can still transport eggs or bed bugs. So there are a number of different ways in which bed bugs can actually enter into a room within a hotel themselves. They could be brought in by guests, they could be brought in by staff. But what's important to understand is most of the time they're brought in without anyone even knowing that they are carrying those bed bugs through the property. But what's really important to understand is actually, if they're that good at hitching a ride, what happens when they're in the building? So once inside the hotel, a bedbug will continue looking for a free ride, new areas to explore, based on what semiochemicals they can smell. So that could be that they're looking for a meal, that could be that there's other bedbugs nearby that are emitting the aggregation pheromone or a sex pheromone. The difference is now that they've gone from looking for a ride on a quiet urban road, and instead they've now got a super highway to travel on. They've now got items such as luggage racks, linen transport, housekeeping carts, which give all of these give an opportunity for bed bugs to spread. So not only do you have all of the other items we discussed, you've also got a number of other ways, but also you've got a huge amount of movement and a huge amount of item transportation as we go through hotels. However, one of, if not the biggest enabler of spreading a bedbug infestation once in a hotel is actually human behavior. So imagine, if you will, within your property, you have a 50th birthday party or a wedding or whatever it may be is taking place in one of your function spaces. And there's a group booking of 30 rooms. The Smith family joins the Jones family for a few drinks beforehand. Brothers, sisters, cousins, aunties, uncles, and friends are all moving around each other's rooms to catch up, give gifts, socialize. And the reality of this is that at this stage, there may still only be a handful of bed bugs within the hotel. In fact, did you know that in almost all cases, the party that brings the bed bugs in are actually not the ones affected? So there is a huge risk in terms of the spread of bed bugs, not just in how easy it is for them to be brought into the hotel, but how quickly they can move once they're actually in the building. So once they're in and they found a safe space to hide, or they found a food host, I think it's important to understand, well, what does that timeline look like? And actually, when do we notice that infestation? And how can we best handle it and best treat it? So once the bedbug enters a room, they actually begin to ingrain themselves in gaps that can be small as 1 to 2 millimeters. So day 0, bedbug enters the rooms via one of the methods we've already discussed. In weeks 1 and 2, they begin to hide and lay eggs. And at this point, there'll be none of the obvious telltale signs that there's an infestation. So we're already 2 weeks in, and without spotting a very, very, very small bedbug in a very, very tight gap, you wouldn't know that they're there. In weeks 2 to 4, those eggs begin to hatch, and bites begin as the nymphs search for their first blood meal. However, it's really important to note that just because the bites occur, this doesn't mean they'll be noticed. As I mentioned before, up to about 70% of people either didn't react or had a delayed reaction to a bedbug bite. So we enter into weeks 4 and 6. We start to see the telltale warning signs come to light. Blood spots on the linen, the distinct odor of bedbugs. But by the time we reach week 6, the infestation continues to grow. However, it's now more likely to be seen with the human eye during room changeovers, etc., housekeeping routines. One thing to think about in this scenario is during that 6-week period, how many guests have been in that room? How many opportunities have arisen for the bedbugs to catch another free ride to a different room or a common area within the hotel? Catching bedbugs early is pivotal in making sure treatment is effective, but how late is too late? If you only notice them by week 6, the risk of spread is growing exponentially. And I guess what's important to understand is, what does this mean to your guests and to you? So the first and not obvious impact is to your guests is the physical impact. Minor reactions to bites can lead to small red bumps and itching. However, this can become more severe from clusters of bites and swellings to large swollen welts. Allergic reactions, and in some rare instances, reactions can be much, much more severe, but they can also produce anxiety, hypervigilance. Many people fear being bitten at night, which leads to difficulty falling asleep. Checking bed repeatedly or sleeping lightly can create chronic stress and insomnia. With the rise of social media and TikTok and travel influencers, it wouldn't take a huge amount for one of those to be bitten, and all of a sudden a large number of people are now checking their beds, checking their mattresses, checking their pillows, checking everything around the hotel room, and having that level of anxiety that, am I going to be bitten? Are there bed bugs here? Does the hotel state that it's bed bug protected? How can I make sure that I'm safe and I'm not going to be bitten here? And obviously all of that leads to sleep disruption, regular awakings, lighter sleep cycles, overall poor sleep quality, and this leads to guests not being satisfied with their stay, meaning that there's a higher likelihood of complaints, higher likelihood of bad reviews. We all know that within hospitality, guest experience is priority number one. We want to make sure our guests have a fantastic experience and that all of the things that happen run smoothly and are almost unseen to them as they have an amazing experience within the hotel. However, in some cases, the impact on guests can be even more impactful on the hotel. In fact, 40 to 50% of hotels in the US have faced bedbug related legal action at least once, based on industry surveys and legal data used in kind of recent years. Most of the time, this tends not to result in actual lawsuits, as there's a number of factors considered here and a number of different factors. However, the real takeaway here is bedbug issues are common enough that in hotels that legal action is not rare. Even if most cases don't reach court, the impact is still there. So what does that mean on the bottom line of the hotel? So there's a few things to consider when we take into account an average costing. As for many hotels, this will vary depending on the level of infestation, the cost of material replacement, the cost and the type of treatment completed by a pest controller, as well as your average room rate. So as an example though, we can assume that a replacement of soft goods can cost on an average upwards of £2,000. And this can vary from just a mattress being replaced to other soft furnishings such as curtains, headboard, decorative pillows. We have had instances with some of our customers as well where the bed bug has entered into a large number of built-in areas, which has led to the room needing to be ripped out. Again, treatments, this can vary depending on the internal team that completes it, if it's an external pest controller that completes it, if the treatment's an insecticide spray, a steam treatment, or a heat treatment, how many visits are required to complete the treatment. However, we can assume quite safely that treatment is going to cost as a minimum £500 or above. Take into account your lost room revenue, and again, depends on the season, the hotel location. If the room's closed during the entire treatment span, which for insecticidal sprays could take up to 30 days, or if this is sold in between insecticidal sprays as an example. Also, how long does the room need to be closed off for heat treatment? Can you access in the ventilation through the window? Do you need to seal off an entire room from the outside? There's a number of different factors when you take into the treatment revenue or the lost room revenue. But what's clear is that it will have a massive impact on the RevPAR of the hotel. And as we can see, the total lost on average is an infested room can easily be upwards of £4,000. However, there are sources such as Hospitality Net reports, Hospitality Net that reports that a single bedbug incident in a hotel room can result in £25,000 to £30,000 in lost revenue due to closures, guest relocation, refunds, but also reputational damage. So whilst historically these have been isolated incidents, we are seeing that bodies such as the BPCA state that up to 20% of infestations reappear after treatment. This leads to further treatment, further revenue loss, and driving demand actually for monitoring solutions. The impact of bed bugs, however, doesn't just stop with a guest in the hotel. It can actually have a much wider impact on the world that we live in. A recent study commissioned by BAPAS actually shows that eradicating bed bugs in a 50-room hotel generates the same CO2 emissions as 229 one-way economy flights for a single passenger between London and New York. From reputational damage, it goes without saying, guest experience, as I mentioned, is at the heart of hospitality. Poor reviews and the publicity that could lead to more severe outcomes can carry or can go a long way in terms of damaging brand reputation. Off the back of that, you've got online algorithm penalties, platforms like Booking.com, Expedia, TripAdvisor. They don't just display reviews, they rank listings based on cleanliness scores, complaint frequency. Mentions of bed bugs can actually quietly push your hotel down those search rankings. Another unseen implication, staff retention and workplace risk. Housekeeping, maintenance staff are more exposed. They're more likely to carry bed bugs home. And this can lead to higher staff turnover, increased sick leave, compensation claims, to name just a few things. And whilst guest experience is top, looking after your team and looking after your staff is equally as important within the hospitality industries I come from. And I think it's important that we don't just talk about your guest experience, but it's how those guests get that experience, and it's through the staff. We want to make sure they're happy. We want to make sure they're willing to come to work and they don't have unseen risk. As well as that, competitive differentiation pressure. So there are a number of hotels actually that are starting to market themselves as bed bug safe, claiming that they have protocols or advanced detection systems. And actually what we're seeing is this can quite easily become a competitive standard and not just a differentiator. So we've spoken about bed bugs, we've spoken about how they travel, we've spoken about the impact. But let's talk about actually what's the implication of having a monitoring system in place. So when we look at monitoring systems, the most common piece of feedback that I've heard from hoteliers is that there isn't time to proactively monitor for bed bugs. We all know housekeepers work on a time in motion. We all know that every single thing they do is monitored almost potentially down to the second, depending on the brand and the employer. But what if we looked at this differently and focused not on the time it would take to proactively monitor, but the revenue it would save by catching bed bugs early? If we assume that housekeeping costs run at £15 per hour, that actually what we can see is that proactive monitoring is time well spent. On the initial install, based between 2 minutes per monitor or 4 minutes per room, 2 monitors per room, this gives us a total of 6.7 hours or a cost of just over £100. Add that to the monthly monitoring with minimal added time per room, we can see the cost per year is actually just shy of £100, giving us a total year one cost of circa £200. You're probably looking at it and thinking, well, that's £200 I have to spend to install them. But actually, what's the benefit of catching them early? So we know the cost of installing regular monitoring for year one, but let's look alongside this as the other costs. We've already covered the potential costs following an infestation: lost room revenue, treatment, replacement of soft goods. Early monitoring actually allows us to minimize the operation costs when bed bugs are found. Treatment will always be required to eliminate the infestation. However, catching them early means that treatment can be completed at a smaller scale and much more localized, which reduces room downtime and impact on RevPAR, as well as eliminating the need to replace soft goods. In fact, catching just one room early could save you up to £3,500. If you catch 2 rooms early, you can save up to £7,000. And that continues to compile and build up. Every single room that you catch early is revenue saved. You're not replacing the soft goods. You're not leaving the room closed as quickly. You can liaise closer and faster with either your internal IPM teams or your external pest controller to react quickly to eliminate the problem before it becomes an infestation. By catching bed bugs early, one room caught early actually covers your entire year one cost. Take into that if you implement a monitoring system, actually, year two, those costs are cut in half. There's no need to install in every room. It just becomes part of monitoring. In fact, when you break that down financially, it's actually just as cheap, if not cheaper, per room, per day, than adding one small Nespresso coffee refill into your room. So we know that proactive monitoring is key and is a key part of best practice for bed bug protection within hospitality. So what good looks like: staff training, particularly within housekeeping. What we saw actually was a 2023 UK study found that only about 16% of people could actually confidently identify a bed bug. So if the staff aren't aware of what to look for, not only in terms of what a bed bug looks like, but also in terms of the early warning signs of blood spots, infestations can easily be missed. Add to that room inspections protocols. So you have to ask the question, if bed bugs can only be confidently identified by 16 people, who are the people that are inspecting those rooms? So how often are those rooms checked for bed bugs? Most hotels will have regular pest control visits or perhaps complete some of the IPM protocols themselves. However, how often are your pest controllers going into every room? Unless a guest has complained about bites. Are they focusing more on rodents? Are they focusing more on cockroaches? And is actually bed bugs a hidden risk that isn't necessarily being checked for or being inspected for? And I think if you don't do those things and you don't do them right, what we're talking about here is that risk of infestation just increases exponentially. Having rapid response procedures is absolutely pivotal. How quickly could you internally react to bedbug issues outside of just closing the room? Particularly if it's found when the population is already high. If you catch and react to bedbugs early, it's key to reducing lost revenue and improving both staff and guest experience. And early detection devices. As I've mentioned already, early detection is really, really pivotal in tackling the bedbug issue head on. We saw from the earlier timeline that actually the sooner you know bedbugs are in the room, the smaller the population is and the easier it is to treat. So, speaking of early detection devices, I would like to introduce you to BugSense Sentry Pro. BugSense Sentry Pro is available in multiple locations around the globe. It's a cutting-edge, discrete bedbug monitor that allows for rapid detection. It's ideal for low to medium level infestations. It's reusable and discreet, and it's particularly attractive to first, second, and third install nymphs. Sentry Pro assists hospitality experts all over the world to ensure bedbugs are identified and treated before they become a guest issue. It allows businesses such as hotels to be proactive on infestations and not reactive to customer complaints. So I'll talk through briefly how Sentry Pro works. And if you remember earlier in the presentation, I talked through chemotaxis. Well, Sentry Pro actually works to utilize the invisible language of scent to attract bedbugs of all life stages. So hungry bedbugs are naturally attracted to pheromones, which are odors released by the host, us, the human, that bedbugs follow to find a blood meal. Bedbugs that are looking for somewhere to hide actually follow the bedbug aggregation pheromone, which is a species specific. So when we talk about the aggregation pheromone, it's the safe harborage. Remember, they're looking for somewhere safe to hide. So here we can see an example of the Sentry Pro trap developed by DOT that contains the slow release attractant that mimics and replicates the bedbug aggregation pheromone. By strategically placing the trap near the head end of the bed, it creates an ideal refuge for bedbugs to hide without competing with the host. In fact, placing the trap near the host actually improves detection. So on the next slide, I'll show you some examples of Sentry Pro in action. And apologies if it's still a little bit early for people in the world. But what we can see here is on all of these were actually completed in rooms that had been treated. So there had been chemical sprays completed in the rooms. Sentry Pro was placed down to ensure proactive monitoring continues. And actually, particularly on the example on the left-hand side, that trap was placed down on a Friday and checked on the Monday. So we can see here in that instance, the chemical spray that completed was not successful. And what we can see on a number of these as well is a high number of first, second, and third instar nymphs, meaning that traditionally what we see is eggs are incredibly difficult to destroy. And actually, by placing monitoring in place, even if the adult population is destroyed, when those eggs hatch and search for a safe place to hide, Sentry Pro is the only place for them. So, appreciate I've done quite a lot of talking to you for about 25 minutes or so. So I just wanted to leave you with kind of one key takeaway from today's slides. And that is, bedbugs in hospitality is inevitable. However, the spread is not. Now, whether you work in a world where bedbugs are common practice, or if you've had some experience with them in the past, or even if you've never seen them as an issue, one thing in clear, they are inevitable. With the current knowledge, policies, procedures, and by utilizing the best-in-class tools on the market, such as Sentry Pro, the hospitality industry can protect itself, its guests, from the negative impacts that bedbugs bring. So all that's left for me to say to you now is thank you very much for your time.